All right. Welcome to whatever we're going to name this podcast in the future with Michael Dominichetti with Keller Williams Realty. And we have here Mr. Amiel.
Yeah, Amiel with Mortgage Alliance.
All right. Welcome, Amiel. And we are going to discuss today the 2023, how things kind of wrapped up for real estate and mortgages at the end of the year, and take a look at some historical numbers and then make a little bit of prediction and try to help people understand what we think we're going to be seeing in the next 12 months ahead.
We'll do our best.
We'll do our best, yes. Yeah. My crystal ball has been a little hazy the last few years.
Yeah. I think everybody's crystal ball has been a bit hazy the last few years.
Oh man.
That's just the nature of the business, the nature of trying to predict things. It's tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting having this conversation with people that are in different industries too. People that are in the mutual fund industry or stock market industry, or they are financial planners, and asking them what they are seeing in their particular sector and how that intersects with real estate. I don't know that anybody could have really predicted what we saw in 2023. I mean, we knew the interest rates were going to go up a little bit. However, the way that the market reacted, I don't think anybody really saw that.
Yeah, it certainly happened a lot quicker than we thought, I think. The actual, real interesting part, and maybe I'll jump into some of the recap on the rates and stuff, is that, the majority of the rate increases actually happened in 2022. I think that, from my perspective, I thought of it as, most of the impact came in 2023 from all of those increases in 2022. So in 2022, the interest rates, actually the variable interest rates, the Bank of Canada rate, they increased 4% in 2022.
Wow.
Whereas in 2023, they actually only increased 0.75%. When I look back in my memory, I was like, oh, that all happened last year.
Yeah.
But I think what we've sort of seen is that the impact of, and people feeling it has majority come in 2023, right? And people are really starting to tighten their belts, right? Really feeling that impact of the increases, which is really interesting.
That makes a lot of sense in the world of real estate too, because what happens today, we don't usually see for 30, 60, 90 days, sometimes even 6 months, as far as, bank changes, policy changes. There's this delayed effect when decisions are made.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. Right. It takes time for people to realize the hurt and, and make changes, and that impacts decisions. Right. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, last year in the spring, we saw, a decrease in inflation, and things were looking really rosy. And we thought that, we were at the the peak, or, that there weren't going to be any more interest rate increases after that. But we were definitely wrong. Mm-hmm. All the crystal ball was wrong then too. So yeah, really interesting, because we did see like a little uptick in, in volume, I think, in the spring, and people got out there, but then quickly afterwards, as soon as the Bank of Canada, increased again in July, I think it was, then things, expectations tampered, right? And people started to get back on the bench, and and not so much activity.
Well, I think people need to realize too that there's a lot of factors that go into how they make those decisions at Bank of Canada. And, talking to people, they'll say, well, the inflation numbers are in check, so they need to lower the rate. Well, it's not the only indicator that they use. It's certainly one of the big ones. However, I don't think that it's the only thing that goes into it, because they're looking at things like employment numbers, and they're looking at, average household spending and debt loads, and all that kind of stuff goes into the mix.
For sure. All those different things. And it's not necessarily just the, single inflation rate. They look at different categories of inflation. They look at housing, they look at, food, right? Where are the the increase is coming from. Is it just one sector or multiple sectors? So yeah, there's definitely lots of different factors, with it. We actually did see a decrease in inflation all the way to 3.1%, which was, really good for 2023. But December numbers just came out, and inflation increased, right? So we're up to 3.4 as of December, which those numbers just came out yesterday. Timely for our recording here.
Well, I know I did my contributions to adding to the economy in the month of December with all the Christmas shopping. So,
well, that's exactly it, right? Like, how can we expect that it's going to go down when when Christmas is right there, right?
yeah, you know what? I think that's something that people need to keep in mind with this kind of stuff as well. Is that there's so many outlying factors like secondary, tertiary factors that impact those numbers, because you have to look at all of those different layers. It's like an onion, right? You have so many layers to this whole thing.
That's exactly right. And I think that, they can't be too hasty with, with making changes, right? Making changes too aggressively in the wrong direction can have an even bigger impact, right? Resulting in, more increases in interest rates and things like that. So it's, it's something that they do have to, just play slowly, right? They can't just jump right into decreases. Although we would love that, right? Ultimately it's got to be a slow process.
Well, and personally, I feel like they kept the interest rates for so low for so long because of all the COVID stuff and whatever is really what has led to such a fast pendulum swing in the last 2 years, is because the rates were so low for so long, which really they shouldn't have been. They should have started months ahead, slowly creeping those numbers up, even if it's just 10 basis points or, a little bit here, a little bit there over a longer period, instead of holding it for so long and then boom, 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 boom. Like, how many increases in a row was there? It was like
a lot, right? Like we went, up 4.75% in the last, sort of year and a half, 2 years, right? It's a lot. That's a huge, a huge amount. So it's, I think that a lot of people would agree with you on that, Michael. And I think I certainly agree with you. If they had done it sooner and they had done it slower, we wouldn't have, I think people could have adjusted, right? Where it was such a big, drastic increase. Interestingly enough, nobody complained certainly about the drastic decreases that happened.
Of course not.
right at COVID. But, we sort of started here, we dropped down at COVID, but now we're at, a point where we were, we're sort of almost double what we were, before COVID, again, because we sort of went so far and, got ourselves into so much trouble that, that now we have to overcompensate to get us back on track. And I think that, so yeah, it's just going to take a little bit longer for, for everything to even out, but we will eventually come down. The nice thing is that we've, even though variable interest rates have not decreased, we've already started seeing fixed rates decrease, which is great. And I think, a lot of people don't know that because a lot of people are so focused on what the Bank of Canada does. And, rates aren't going down until the Bank of Canada lowers the rates, but that's not necessarily the case. The Bank of Canada rate, the prime rate, the overnight rate that the Bank of Canada sets, that's all in relation to variable rate mortgages, lines of credit cards, things like that, right? That have a varying interest rate.
Sure. Well, that has a very quick, direct impact on what's happening with the economy, because if they change that, which is affecting the variable rates, that's going to have a direct impact next month on people's income and expenses.
Yeah. That's exactly it. That is exactly it.
Cool. And speaking of next announcements, I've got the schedule here, which I found on the Bank of Canada website.
It's a good research.
So they've published their schedule for this year, so they know to the day when they're going to be making those rate announcements. So the next one is actually happening in a week.
Yep, that's next week. So basically, what the experts are saying, always the quote unquote experts, what they're saying is that it's just going to hold steady this month. I think there had been, some that had hoped that there would be a decrease, as early as January, but I don't think that's realistic, especially with the inflation number that just came out with it being
Yeah,
slightly higher.
I can't see them doing that because they made so many increases last year. I think what they're going to want to do is hold the line for a little while just to let things come to some level of equilibrium before they start making any kind of alterations. So
yeah, I think you're right. I think that what most experts are saying is that majority is that we're over the hump sort of thing, right? We've sort of reached the max and we're now in the, when is it going to decrease phase? So, so that's certainly a good thing, right? That's certainly a good thing that we seem to be over that hump. And I think that it's been, long enough, that they're fairly confident about that versus like last spring where it was just sort of a quick, things dropped, fairly quickly and people thought that it might be over, but it wasn't. I think that we're not in the same boat that we were at that time. I think that we are at the peak. There are other indicators that are saying that yes, we're going to be on the decrease. So now it's just sort of a matter of when will those decreases happen? What most of the experts are again experts are saying right now is that we should see about a 1% decrease this year, with an estimated 1% decrease next year. And again, that's in the Bank of Canada overnight rate, which impacts which then decreases the prime rate the same amount typically. So yeah, so we can sort of expect that. And then in terms of timeline, what the experts are saying is sort of anywhere starting in April, April to June is where they're seeing that start. And I think that's sort of fair. That gives definitely a few months to see how things are going and make sure that things are trending in the right direction. Before they start making the changes.
Yeah, I think the timing of that makes a lot of sense to me as well. Not that we expect policymakers to do anything that makes sense.
It's a good point, Michael.
We have the announcement happening on January the 24th, which is the first one for 2024. And then the next announcement, or the second announcement after that, is March the 6th.
Yeah.
And then after that would be April the 10th. And the stuff that I've been reading online, people I've been talking to, is they're expecting to hold the line until the April the 10th announcement. Yeah. It also kind of makes sense as far as the real estate market is concerned, because typically we see the real estate market starting to accelerate come like end of February leading into March, around Easter-ish time. We start to see the number of listings starting to increase slightly. We see the number of transactions starting to increase. There's more buyers coming out from hibernation and getting out there and looking at houses and purchasing. So I feel like they're going to want to hold off as long as they can to see how that comes into play this spring. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And why they may hold off even longer, right? To not, stoke the market too much, right? I mean, that's certainly one of the concerns that I have is that, that we're just going to end up with prices skyrocketing, and multiple offers and all that kind of thing. I mean, the bottom line is that we're,
by
overall,
the way, most realtors hate that kind of market. To be honest with you, I hate it. I like that whole thing that happened 2 years ago, back in 2022, the beginning part, that January, February, where the prices just skyrocketed.
Yeah.
It was awful. I felt so bad for the people looking to get into the market that,
for sure,
they could have bought that house for $600,000. 2 months later, it's selling for $800,000, and there's 30 offers. Like, this is ridiculous. So
yeah, it certainly is, and we see the same thing on our side. It's just so challenging with people going in multiple offers. You can't have conditions in there for finance, and most mortgage brokers should be saying, like, you should have a financing condition in there. There's too many variables, and you never know what's going to happen that's going to affect your financing. So going in, with no conditions is definitely not something that I recommend, regardless of the market or individual or whatever. So it's it definitely makes it challenging all the way around. And we saw a lot of heartbreaks as well on our side, on the mortgage side of things.
Yeah, like a little bit of competition is not necessarily a bad thing. Healthy competition is good overall. However, when you have 30 people trying to buy one of anything, whether it's a house or a car or a shirt, it's going to drive prices up and become a
Yeah.
problem down the road. The thing is, all these things that have happened has created problems in the future, and we are now at that point where we're having to deal with this, which is why the
Yeah.
rates went up and all these
That's
other
exactly it.
policy things happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So if everybody can just do a nice, steady,
Don't go crazy. Don't
don't
lose
go
your mind.
crazy, don't
Hmm.
lose your mind. Yeah, I know it's always challenging when you're in the heat of the moment, and for sure, totally understand that. But that's my hope, right? Is that we can have a nice steady, getting back to normal sort of thing, rather than a huge increase in people making multiple offers and getting into huge competitions, because it doesn't help anybody.
Well, I think that's the challenge that we're facing right now is because the market has been so like all over the place in the last really since 2016.
Yeah.
So if you go back, 5 years to or 6 years to 2016, 2017, where we saw prices starting to increase rapidly, the interest rates were quite low, and we had a lot of people coming to Canada with money in their pocket, wanting to buy houses that started to gobble up the inventory. And, the policymakers started making some changes then with reducing amortizations for mortgages, putting into place things like you had to qualify at a stress test level and, all those kinds of things. They start bringing these things into effect because they're trying to slow the market taking off like a rocket.
Yeah. Yeah.
That a lot of that stuff started happening back in 2016, 2017. And, what's happened now is there's just been so much chaos in the market. How do you start to try to maybe make adjustments to those policies that they've brought into place to keep things from going like a wildfire and allow people that are trying to get into the market, first time home buyers that,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
they never had an opportunity to buy 5, 6 years ago because they were 18 years old and still going to school.
Yep.
And they
Yep.
see real estate as a great thing to do. And they're trying to get in and they're having to deal with all these policies and higher interest rates and crazy high prices and all that kind of thing. So I feel for the policymakers in that way because it cannot be easy to try to understand what the next right step could be to allow people like that to have access without turning this into a raging wildfire again.
That's exactly right. And it's, and you can't treat people differently either, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a challenge, and I definitely feel for all the first time home buyers that are out there,
Mm-hmm.
especially, a single income first time home buyer. It's like, it's so challenging to get qualified for a mortgage. It's insane. We
Mm-hmm.
see mainly we have, co-signers, right? We have parents coming on the deal to help with co-signing and getting qualified for something, or what we have seen some of the time is friends getting together, right? And saying, you know what, we need to
Mm.
get into the market. Let's partner up, and that could be 2 to 3 to 4 people, right? Like, let's
Wow.
partner up and let's buy this property together. Let's get to a point where we're stabilized, and then we can look at, getting our own place down the road. But we're losing out by not being in the real estate
Yeah.
market, right? So let's get
So
in any way that we can.
yeah, so when I bought my first house, which was back in 2000, I couldn't afford to buy a house on my own. I wasn't married at that point, and my sister wanted to get into the market. She couldn't afford to buy on her own. So we got together and bought a house, turned it into a duplex. And I lived there for 7 years while we built equity. And then I was
Yeah,
able
perfect.
to retrieve my portion of the equity and then move on from there.
Perfect.
So,
Yeah, that's a good way to do it, right?
mhm.
And yeah, and I think it's needed, more and more now than ever with the way things are going. I know
Mhm.
there's been a lot of push from, people in our industry that are saying, well, we're at the peak of the interest rate, so let's get rid of the stress test,
Mm.
right? The reality is I just don't think that that's going to happen.
I
you,
can't see
you
it
know,
happening either.
I don't think so either. Interest rates will come down again, and it'll make it more reasonable. They had actually looked at implementing, other uh, criteria for qualifying, in 2023, which they ended up curbing, which could have made it even more challenging. So it's, yeah, I think that I know, right?
Yeah, you see the number of sales last year, it was down quite a bit compared to previous years. So that would have been a very cold bucket of water on the market.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. Overall activity was certainly, I think, sort of half or less than half of what it has been in the past. So, yeah, definitely a tough year for real estate agents and mortgage brokers alike last year. But things will increase in 2024. The number of renewals coming up in 2024 is I think we're around 1.1 million in estimated renewals coming up this year, and another 1.2 the following year.
Wow.
A lot of those shorter term mortgages that are now coming to fruition. But
well, that's okay for you. That doesn't help me as a real estate agent, though.
Well, when they're up for renewal, they could be looking at changes too. So
that's true. Hey, speaking of numbers,
yeah,
how about we share that cool little spreadsheet?
You had a spreadsheet that you prepared on average prices and things like that over the last few years, which is super interesting, right? Really interesting to see the impacts of what's going on in the market to the average price. So that was a really interesting chart that you had there, the price versus number of sales.
Yeah, so if we look here at, maybe I'll bump this over a little bit because we don't need all the month over month information. So we'll just do the year over year stuff here. So what we have here is the calendar year. We have the number of sales that happened that year, the average price, and then the change. Now, this information is taken for all of Hamilton and all of Halton. So that includes Halton would be Burlington, Oakville, Milton, Ancaster, like anything that falls in that region. And then for Hamilton, that would include proper Hamilton, Waterdown, Flamborough, Ancaster, Dundas, Grimsby, Stony Creek. And I pulled this information. I did month over month to compile all of this for the years from 2000 up until today. And what I love about this is the information can help you understand trends and look for things that can help us make sort of predictions. I wouldn't call it like a hard and fast, hey, this is what's going to happen. However, when you look back at the history, you can kind of ascertain that, if we look at the number of homes sold starting in 2000, you can see this nice little steady increase, which makes a lot of sense because of immigration numbers and new housing starts and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Why did it fall off here in 2006, 7, 8? Right.
Yeah.
What happened during that time frame? What happened was, house prices reached a peak. There was all the stuff going on down in the States. People were losing money, the big short thing.
The big short, yeah. Yeah, the big market crash that they had, right? Certainly had an impact on us as well. Certainly not as much as what they had, but yeah, that definitely had an impact, right? 2008 was a big year, a big change. So,
yeah, that was when I got my real estate license. That was perfect timing. And
perfect timing.
Yeah, I had bought a house and gotten married, and we were having our first kid around that time. So great time to jump into real estate and have a market crash.
That's exactly it. It. And so you see that there's a huge decrease in number of sales, right? During that time, as there was market turmoil and people tightening the belt. But interestingly enough, the average price actually started to go up, right?
Yes. And the gray line here is the average price year over year. And, there was a little bit of a dip here right after all of that happened. So if you look at the number of sales dropping, and then we had a little bit of a dip in the price here, you can see 2018, after we had some pretty good growth, there was a small retraction of just shy of 4%. And then what happened the following year? Things stabilized. the employment numbers stabilize, interest rates are fine, and people start moving around and buying and selling houses again.
Yeah. And I think if you draw, if you sort of draw a straight line through there, you'll see that the market, increased, but then decreased to sort of follow that overall trend, right? Which is the nice, slow and steady increase in property value, which we sort of expect with real estate, right?
Yeah, up until 2021. Right.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
the hard part for me when you see these kinds of numbers and you look at the history. And if you go back even farther, which I have another chart that shows that from 1955 until today, that real estate typically improves 4 to 5% per year.
Yeah.
Right. That's a more normalized, increase as far as housing prices are concerned.
Yeah, and
So,
we've certainly seen, bigger increases, obviously over the last few years. I mean, telling from that, gray line there is a huge
mhm.
increase, well above, that 4 or 5%. But even, so even, drawing that straight line through there now, I sort of wonder if that, is that 4 to 5% still valid? Or is it higher than that? And because if it's not higher than that, then there's going to be much more correction because we've been at sort of eight. If you take the average, you look at there was big increases, but then we saw a decrease. Is there going to be further decrease or not? Or what's that sort of overall steady increase going to be over the last, let's say, 10 years, right? Is it going to be that 4 or 5%, or is it going to be higher? And my feeling is it is going to be higher. And there are, many factors that are causing that to happen, right?
Yeah, I think if you look at the graph and the numbers here and you go back to like 2018, 2019, where the average price in the area was creeping up on 700,000, and you jump ahead to 2023. So if you go from like 2019 into 2020 saying, okay, well, the average price is going to be around 700,000. And then you multiply that compoundly at 5% for the next 4 to 5 years, you end up at about $1 million.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you kind of negate this weird bump that we had where the prices went up 15 and 25% in 2020 and 2021, and then erase the losses that we had, call them losses, in the last year, right, where the average price went down by 6%. If you kind of equalize all that out, then where we are currently is kind of on that similar trajectory that started back in 13, 14, 15.
13, 14, 15. Yeah, that's
right.
That's
where we
exactly
had
right.
this like 6-ish to 7% increase year over year. We just had this really wild ride that happened in 2021 and 2022.
Yeah. Yeah. And even there was a much tamer, but sort of similar ride in 2017, right? Where we saw, big increases in prices, multiple offers, all those sorts of things, which caused that little bump, little bump right there. But same thing, you see it came back down and equalized, right? And I think that's what we've seen. We've sort of seen that equalization now. So it'll be interesting to see how this year shapes up, if there is more equalization. But I think that overall, I think there will be, stabilization this year. Hard to say whether this year is going to be more of that stabilizing or whether we're going to see that more of the increasing. I think one thing that still sort of is always in my mind is that we're still bringing tons of people into Canada, which is putting a strain on on the housing supply, right? There's just more people and we're not building houses fast enough to keep up with that. So
I agree. I've been saying this for a couple of years now, that what happened through COVID with the cost of materials skyrocketing, the skilled labor challenges that we faced inside the housing industry between, framers and carpenters and plumbers and electricians and all that stuff, it brought the new housing starts way down. Builders were just putting a complete squash on projects of building literally hundreds and thousands of houses and condos. Like everything just came grinding to a halt for a couple of years.
Yeah.
They are slowly getting back out to building these projects, but they're now 2-3 years behind where they could have been and should have been. So again, housing being usually a pretty lagging thing that happens, they're going to start ramping up their construction of these homes. However, it's going to take them a couple of years. I mean, if you look at any of these new home sites, it's, come pre-register, blah, 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 but you're not getting the keys for 3 years. Well, we still have 500,000 people coming to Ontario this year. Where are they going to live?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a really great question. So
it is good. Yeah, it is. It is. And I know I was actually reading an article just this morning that that Ontario is well behind the numbers that they had promised for new houses by, what was it, 2030 or 2031 or something like that. So they've so now now good old Dougie, he's getting nervous. He's like, oh, I'm not not going to make my numbers. So so they're trying, right? But it's government. It's slow.
Yeah, and I think that's the reality that we need to face as individuals. So if you are thinking that you are waiting for this 30% correction in housing prices in this particular area, it might happen, I don't know, out in Saskatchewan or the Northwest Territories or whatever. I don't know. I don't follow those markets that closely.
Yeah.
I can tell you in Ontario, I would be there's got to be a cataclysmic event, in my opinion, inside our financial world or real estate, or something major has to happen for us to even consider that being a possibility.
Yeah, I agree, Michael. I have a hard time believing that there would be that much of a correction. I feel like we've seen the correction. Maybe there's still room for for some small correction, but
but not 30%. I mean, look at what happened last year.
30%.
Right. We just had our interest rates go from you can get a 5-year fixed mortgage 2 years ago for 2%, and now you're like 5.5 to 6%, which is triple.
Yeah,
and
which is triple.
The house prices on average went down only 6.5%. Right. So unless interest rates go to 13%, right, which
is not going to happen.
I can't see that. It would shut our entire economy down. Like the country would just be done.
Yeah.
So exactly. I can't see that happening, and because I don't see the interest rates really going any higher, I don't see the house prices coming down any more than they already have.
Yeah.
So if you're sitting on the sidelines saying, hey, I'm waiting for this bubble to burst and prices to drop 30% before I get into the market, good luck.
Yeah.
I can't see it happening.
No, either can I. I don't think that we're going to see those interest rates, and the supply and demand equation just, isn't leaning in the favor of huge decreases in prices. That's the bottom line, right? I think that, a lot of people have been sitting on the fence for quite a while, and I think they're, they're about ready to get off, right? And get back out there and buy.
I talk to a lot of realtors pretty much on a daily basis, and I'm talking to people that have been in business for a long time, and we all, as realtors, have lists of buyers that are qualified, have good jobs, they're squirreling away money, they're either living with mom and dad or in a basement apartment or whatever, and they are picking their time when they're ready to jump into the market. And they're right there. They're all right there. And I feel like as soon as we hear the rate announcements with the Bank of Canada and even next week, I can see next week if the Bank of Canada says, we're going to hold the line for another 5 weeks till our next announcement. And, the predictors are all suggesting that there could be a reduction in April. Then buyers are going to say, well, I'm going to go to my mortgage person, get a 120-day rate lock. And if I can get a deal now at today's rate, great. If not, by the time I actually close my deal in 60 to 90 days, my rate might actually be less.
Yeah, that's exactly it. right? That's exactly
So
it.
I fully expect that we are going to be seeing a lot of buyers returning to the market in the next 60 days.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Have you seen anything on the inventory side? How are we at from? Do you have those numbers handy or no?
So I watch Burlington in particular. It's a market that I've been looking at for a long time.
Hmm.
And I kind of use that as my benchmark as far as inventory levels are concerned.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed over the years of watching this is that for Burlington, what I would call a balanced market is when we have around 500 to 600 active listings.
Yeah.
So if we go back 2 years ago when the market was like crazy, in Burlington, there were 80 active listings. So
Wow.
we had
Yeah. Talk about
literally,
one-sided.
we had like 20% of what would be a normal inventory.
Holy smokes.
And like we just could never get caught up at that point because there were so many people buying homes. We couldn't list them fast enough. It's like, you've got that fire hose that you have a little trickle of water coming out of it. And no matter how fast you try to push it through, it's such a huge volume. You can just never get caught up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's
where
tough.
we're at right now in Burlington is
Yeah.
we've got 300 active listings, which for January, I would say is pretty normal.
Okay.
The inventory levels kind of fluctuate as we go through the year.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would say starting off the year somewhere between like 300, 350 active listings is pretty normal.
Okay. So that's good to know. So we're sort of
Mm-hmm.
in that normal range. And when do you
Mm-hmm.
typically see them start to increase to that, 500 number?
It's been a very,
March.
very long time, probably
Yeah.
5, 6 years that I've seen Burlington inventory over 500.
Oh, really? Eh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Even last summer when things were quote unquote slow,
Hmm.
we saw maybe creeping up to 400, maybe a little over 400 active listings at one point, but it didn't last long.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, there's the supply demand issue again, right?
Exactly. And, one of the metrics that we use, we call absorption.
Yeah.
And absorption basically means if, say, for example, in Burlington, there's 300 active listings. If no new houses came on the market as of today moving forward, how long would it take for us to sell the current inventory? So in the last 30 days in Burlington, there were 120 sales recorded.
Okay.
So what that means is if we keep going at that pace within the next, 2.5 months, we would be at zero.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And what we know, again, this is going back 60, 70 years, is that when we have a market that is what we would call balanced, so we have about the same number of buyers as we have same number of listings, and we have this equilibrium state, is when we have about 4 to 5 months of inventory.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So even at today's levels in January and like December into January over the last 30 days, we're still seeing that we don't have really enough inventory to meet the demand.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah. So even
not
still,
a lot of inventory. Interest rates are not terrible. Large amounts of immigration. What's going to happen to housing prices?
Yeah.
Can't see them going down.
No, I can't see them going down either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting too to see how the default numbers, sort of impact us all. We've been at record low default rates actually since I'm not sure exactly how long, but for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we could potentially see is a slight uptick. I think overall Canada is still, so much more secure than, what our neighbors to the south are. And, we've got a lot of policies in place to sort of prevent that, those defaults from happening. But we are starting to see, the numbers haven't come out for it yet, but we're starting to see, some impacts, I think, from people starting to default, especially once, in the alternative spaces, private lending, things like that. We're seeing that some of those individuals are starting to default. So it'll be interesting to see whether that has an impact on the market at all. Overall, I don't think that it's going to have a huge impact, because I think that the number of mortgages that are going to be going through that full stage to, lender taking it back and selling power of sale, I think is still going to be minimal, compared to, the rest of the goings on in the market. But it'll be interesting to see how those numbers shake out, because right now they're still very, very low compared to what they have been, years and years ago. So.
Sure. Yeah. And then just to put that into some context too, in the last 12 months, so there were 11,200 homes sold in the Hamilton Halton area. And the number of homes, now this is just a very crude number that I'm going by here, because I can go into the MLS system as a realtor has access to, punch in a couple of keywords. And of the 11,200 homes that are sold, it looks like there were 22 that were power of sale.
Yeah, that's not many at all. So it'll be interesting when we do this video next year.
Yes.
I'd love to see how that compares, right? 22 properties in 2023, right? Is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I am curious. Let's remember that.
We'll look back on the video and we'll double check that number to see what it's going to be like.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how that end of it shakes out. But and the interesting.
Here's what's really interesting. If I go into my way back memory machine here to when I first got my license, which is almost 16 years ago now, and the reason why I got my license, we were flipping houses and doing all that kind of stuff. So looking at power of sales and bank sales and all that kind of thing was a big part of what we were looking for, trying to find, the bottom of the barrel homes as far as inventory was concerned.
Yeah.
And at that time, the market would be what I would consider fairly balanced, going back to like 2005, 6, 7, before we got into that crazy market of 07, 08. And we had equilibrium. So, people were paying a fair interest rate, and we had a balanced number of homes being sold every month. And there were a handful of power sales and bank sales. So that was a part of a normal market. So there's always going to be a certain percentage that go into delinquency for whatever reasons.
There's all kinds of reasons, right?
Yeah. I mean, even in a good market, I'm sure if we even looked at, 2-3 years ago, looking at how many power sales were then, it wouldn't be zero. It might not be 22, but it wouldn't be zero either.
No, that's for sure. It's not going to be zero. There's always life circumstances that, that happens, right? I think where we've seen a steady, decline, in my opinion, anyway. I think that we've seen a steady decline because of some of these painful, policies that they put in place, like the stress test and things like that, right? Like, we've been qualifying for, 5 to 5.5% interest rates, for the past 6-7 years, right? So that's why I think we're not in as much trouble as we are. And I think that most of the defaults, I think, are going to be seen on that, private side where there isn't necessarily the same requirements.
I 100% agree with you on that. I think if we look at, we get into the details of those houses that actually went power of sale, I would think in a lot of cases you're going to find out that those were people that were buying houses to flip, right?
Yeah.
Or
it could be.
There's going to be a lot, like you said, there's a lot of reasons why. However, I think it's going to be a pretty micro niche portion of the market. We're not talking about your, dual income families, have a couple of kids playing soccer and all that kind of thing. I don't think you're going to see a lot of those going to power of sale.
No, I certainly agree. Yeah.
Okay. So I am curious to know, from
Yeah.
your perspective, as far as the mortgage side is concerned,
Yeah.
we're facing some unknowns this year going into 2024. And what would your advice be for most people that are out there? They've been able to kind of hold the line through the rates. I know what was the number I heard recently too, where Canadians actually have a higher percentage of variable mortgage compared to the rest of the world. Isn't it like 25 or 30% of Canadians have a variable rate mortgage?
I can't remember the distribution right now, but it is significant, and it does change, right? So it changes as times go on. So, a lot of people through COVID, when rates were so low, like there was a lot of people getting variable rates because the variable rates were better than what the fixed rates were. And and all the way along, as interest rates were increasing, the fixed rates actually increased quicker than what the variable rates did. And so all the way along, while these interest rates were increasing, the variable rate was still the better option because it was, for most of the time, it was like 1% less than what the fixed rates were. Right. Hindsight, of course, is 2020. And, if we had known these things, then, fixed rates could have been the better option. But yeah, there are a significant number. And what we sort of saw through there is that there was a big, once it got to the point where, variable rates and fixed rates were, about the same, or then, variable rates started to increase higher. Well, now people are moving into fixed rates, right? Or they had moved into fixed rates, but more so in the shorter term fixed rates, right? So 3 years, there was a big uptick in those, in those mortgages. We're starting to see now, now people are getting more into the 5-year term mortgages again. Which is typically the scenario. Just over the last couple of years has been the outlier. But
that was me.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put it out there that I was incredibly fortunate. This was not really skill based that I was able to refinance, or actually my mortgage came due literally the month that they started doing increases 2 years ago. So I kind of saw the writing on the wall at that time. I'm like, well, I'm refinancing our mortgage anyways, or renewing our mortgage. And I really do think that rates are going to be going up quite a bit over the next 2 years. So I'm going to lock in for 5 years. So
yeah, so it was a good choice.
I think for my personal situation, though, in that instance, I was more aware because it was top of mind because of renewing the mortgage. If I hadn't been renewing my mortgage, I wouldn't have been paying such close attention to it.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And I think that's what, a lot of people that were in the variable rates, it wasn't, again, it was all the way along. It's like, well, if I lock in now, I'm locking in at like 1% higher than what my variable rate is, right? And so it's a super tough decision to do that. So, anybody that did, I certainly applaud you, because it's challenging to make that decision. But
us Canadians really like to gamble with our mortgages, don't
we? That's it.
I kind of like the idea in the States, right? Where it's like, here's your mortgage, it's 6.5%, but that's your term for the next 30 years. It never changes. You don't have to renew. Like, it's just, you're done.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. There are some benefits to that. That's for sure. That's for sure.
But it could go down.
I know. That's always it, right? So, moral of the story.
Moral of the story is,
it certainly depends, right? Like, that decision of, are you going variable? Are you going fixed? It's certainly an individual decision, right? And it does depend on your comfort with change, right? If you're okay with that potential, change, then maybe variable is the way to go. If you can't stand, the thought, or you're going to be worrying about, a change to your monthly payment, then maybe fixed rate is the way to go, right? You can sort of plan it, set it, forget it, and that's it, right?
The advice to
now,
I was going to say, the advice to me is you need to talk to somebody like Amiel about your situation, because it is very situation dependent.
For sure, right? Yeah. Yeah.
What's your job situation? Do you have a small business that you're running? Are you an employee somewhere? And like, do you work on a salary plus commission based situation? I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
how much of a mortgage do you have left? Are you sending your kids to college in the
Yeah.
next 2 years? Like,
What's
there
coming
are
up?
literally hundreds of variables that go into what is the best choice for your situation. So,
Yeah.
there's no way that we can sit here and assume that this is the one way to go for everybody. It's not possible. So you've got to talk to somebody who asks all the right questions, looks at the big picture. It's not just, variable rates are better for everybody, fixed rates are better for everybody. It's not how it works.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And I think that in anything that you choose, there's going to be some risk, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's just the bottom line, right?
Yep.
And you sort of have to understand that and figure out what risk you're okay with, right? But definitely having that conversation with your mortgage professional so that you can have all the facts and weigh all the options properly is, super important for sure. And it
Mm-hmm.
is not a one size fits all. That's
No,
for sure.
definitely not.
Yeah.
Well, and how
Yeah.
many mortgage products are there out there? Like hundreds and hundreds.
There's a lot. There's a
Yeah.
lot, right? Yeah, yeah. So it's making sure that you're in the right one. We sort of think, fixed versus variable, that's all the options, but there's not. There's home equity lines of credit that you can have, right? Every, lender will have different terms on their mortgage. How much can you pay down? Some have like skip a payment options, in case
Mm-hmm.
there's any unforeseen circumstances. Some of them, if you have that line of credit, that can sort of act as your buffer, especially
Mm-hmm.
for, self-employed individuals or commission-based individuals where things are going up and down, that line of credit can act as your buffer, right? You just
Mm-hmm.
sort of put money in when you get it and that ends up as your, buffer. So yeah, lots of different products out there. And it's definitely good to make sure that you're looking at all of them and making sure you're getting the one that's right for you, your individual situation.
Absolutely. Well, I think we should wrap this up here. I think
Yeah.
the year in review has been very interesting this year because where we started was very different than where we finished on many levels,
Yeah.
right? As far as interest rates and Bank of Canada stuff and fixed versus variable and real estate stuff like number of homes sold and average prices and all that kind of stuff. It was just all over the map. I'm really feeling like 2024 is going to be more like this, right? I don't think we're going to see a lot of big swings. I think
No.
there's going to be like maybe little baby steps, but it's going to be fairly consistent.
I agree. That's sort of my opinion as well. I think overall there's going to be more activity, certainly than there was in 2023. But I think with all the factors at play, I think that I think it should make a fairly stable market. Fingers crossed.
My word of the year is balance.
Yeah, balance. Yeah,
balance. Yeah. Let's call it balance.
I like it. I like it.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time, your expertise, and your input in having this conversation. I've been working with Amiel now. Gosh, it's got to be 7 or 8 years now, I guess.
Yeah, something like that. She's done
maybe even longer.
Holy smokes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a little bit less white in the beard when we got started on all this stuff.
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly it.
What I love about working with Amiel is honest advice every time. He asks a lot of great questions to figure out what's great for me and my family and our situation. And he's able to pull some recommendations, say, well, if you go down this road, then it could look like this for you in a year or two, or you can go this way and this is what it's going to look like. So just having that sounding board to be able to bounce some of my crazy ideas off of, I really appreciate, because I come up with some doozies here and there.
They're all good. They're all good ideas.
Yeah. But I really do appreciate that, and having, somebody that I can lean on and, help me make good financial choices for me and my family. I appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for all the kind words, for sure. Thank you very much. And I echo those, those same comments. Michael, you're, down to earth and, give good advice and ask all the questions. And again, same with mortgages, buying a piece of property is not the same. There's no cookie cutter person, right? So there's no cookie cutter answer. So it's getting down and the biggest thing is honesty, right? Honesty.
Yeah.
You tell it as it is. If it's not a good recommendation, you'll say that, right? And that's unfortunately sometimes it can be hard to hear, but it's what you need to hear, right?
I say this to my kids all the time. I am your parent. I'm not your friend.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way even in the world of real estate too. You're looking to me as a professional to answer those questions that you have and provide you good guidance through this process. And, sometimes you have to have those tough conversations and just say, listen, no, like that's not how this is going to work. You're going to wind up in trouble going down that road. And I need to be honest with you to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly it. And like you said, given the options, right? If you go down this path, this is what it could look like, right? If you go down this path, this is what it could look like. And those are important, information for everybody to have so that they can make an appropriate decision, right? That's key. That's key.
Well, and I've been at this now 16 years and having sold literally hundreds and hundreds of homes and negotiated hundreds of deals. It's not that I have seen it all because I still get surprised. Every house is different. Every person is different. Every situation is different. However, having a large resource of history and experience to be able to pull from does help provide better guidance.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Right. And having all the right contacts is huge. Doesn't matter what I need. I just go to Michael and say, hey, do you have this guy or that girl? Or and Michael provides me a name and a number.
It's funny. My wife and I were actually joking about this the other day because I had this weird situation happen. And anyways, selling a house, and it's a bit of an unusual house because it overlooks a lake. And the kitchen living room is on the second floor and the bedrooms are on the third floor. So we had 3 groups of people come through that were very interested in this house. They were all older couples, and all 3 of them were asking about putting an elevator in the house.
Oh, interesting.
Which is a fantastic option. So I think right away off the top of my head, I'm like, oh, I actually know a retired mechanical engineer that worked for an elevator company that I can call and ask him about taking a look at this property and putting an elevator in the house.
That is too funny. Doesn't matter what the situation.
It's such a bizarre. It's such a bizarre thing to have this Rolodex full of these people that you never know when you're going to need to call on their expertise, but it's nice to know that they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a new one. Yeah, that's a good one.
That was a new one. I mean, 15 years doing this, I've never had anybody, and let alone 3 people in one house asking about putting in an elevator. So the long and the short of it is that you can actually do it in this house. You could put an elevator right through from the ground floor where the garage is, right through up into the living area, and from there up into the bedroom level area.
Wow, interesting.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. Haven't seen that before. That's a new one.
Awesome.
Well, Michael, thanks very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You're
Hopefully
welcome.
We can do more of these on a more regular basis. And
well, I think we're going to have to do these probably at least monthly, if not every other week, because I feel that especially the first half of this year, there's going to be a lot of changes.
Yeah. I think it's going to, at least the first half for sure. Yeah. I'm in if you're in.
We'll do it again in a couple of weeks.
Sounds great. Okay. Thanks, Michael.
You're welcome, Amiel.